to our last speaker in this session. I hope people will not start wandering out because this is really, really very important, like both the other speakers. Louise Taggart is a founder member of FACK, and she's going to talk about what FACK does, why she's a member of FACK, what it means, and why we must fight. And I'd just like to say at the beginning that Louise applied to become a member of the HSE board. She applied for the public interest role on the HSE board in November last year, and put in a cracking application, which we expected at the very least would get an interview. Just after Louise put it in, which was a day before the closing date, they then extended the closing date until January, and went about seeking their own patsy candidates. And the person who got that role, Louise didn't even get an interview, the person who got that job is an ex-NHS chief executive, so essentially an employee. And you will hear more about the shenanigans in the HSE and tripartism during the course of this. So I'd like to introduce to you now Louise Taggart, a founding member of FACK.
Well, those of you who were here last year will also see me doing the FACK update. And last year I spoke about the journey of burdens that are borne by families who lose loved ones in work-related incidents. So when I was preparing for tonight, I couldn't really decide how I was going to say differently many of the same things that I said last year. Then I was listening to a report of the condemned government's latest attempts to cause irreparable damage to the welfare system. A welfare system that's intended to provide protection from the cradle to the grave. And it struck me that so many of the social media posts I've seen recently from my fellow FACKers set out very clearly the impact and the reverberations that a work-related death causes from the cradle because loved ones have ended up in a far too early grave. So that's what I want to talk to you about tonight, while also trying to set out some of what FACK has been up to over the course of the past year. I want to begin with Karen Thompson, whose partner was killed 8 years ago when his head was impaled on the faulty tail lift of a lorry. Last week, Karen wrote on Facebook, "Today we went to Allied Bakeries, ABF. Today we reminded them of his name, Graham's name. Last week his family went to the site where he died. They pinned flowers on the railings, they fastened tributes to a tree. Written beside the top photo, you can't maybe see it quite so clearly, it says, 'This is baby Lorcan, the next generation. You were denied the chance to hold him.' Underneath is one from Heather. She was 6 when her dad was killed. She writes movingly, 8 years later, I'm still staying strong and living out your skill with science. I've also taken on your sporty and competitive side, developing skills in rugby and horse riding. I started a new school and I'm settling in well. Gary, he's now her stepdad, he has helped me show my true self in sport and in life." And poignantly at the end she writes, "I enjoy hearing stories about your antics, and bit by bit memories are coming back, which is rather good." Her children's memories are also something that Helen Farr has spoken of, following her husband Ken's death. Ken was killed when an Asda car park barrier smashed through the windscreen of his car. Their youngest daughter was only around 1 at the time, and she doesn't remember her dad at all. Jess, she was 3. She went to the shops with her dad that fateful day. She saw him being killed. She saw him choking on his own blood. She told her family at one point that Daddy had blood on his face. He had bubbles coming out of his mouth. Little wonder then that she was terrified of blood and that something as commonplace as one of her sisters losing a baby tooth could send her into hysterics. And the impact on those so young, those of school age, can be particularly harsh, because at the time of his father's death, Lee Wright was just starting out on his GCSE year, intent on getting the grades he required to go on to A-levels with an eye to an engineering career. He was mentally unable to cope with school, and now has to face a lifetime of work without those pieces of paper that are a passport to a better life for him and his family. And his grandparents, they're Dorothy and Douglas Wright, who many of you will know. Their fear for his future adds to their pain. Or what of the child who makes their way through school, who's a car enthusiast and who secures the apprenticeship of his dreams in a garage. What then of the windy day that 18-year-old goes to work and helps his manager empty a mixture of petrol and diesel from a dustbin into a small opening of a waste disposal tank on a forecourt? A large amount of the fuel splashes onto the men's overalls. As they empty the mixture, fumes are sucked into the flue of a recently installed gas boiler. That sparks a massive fireball which engulfs them both in flames. His boss runs into the workshop where colleagues use a fire extinguisher to put out those flames. No one realises though that Louis is still on the forecourt, and by the time they do, the fire extinguishers run out. He suffered 80% burns and died in hospital 3 days later. That's what happened to Louis Murphy, that's what his parents now have to live with. There are also those who now regret pushing their sons and daughters to make a better life for themselves by going out into the workplace, because doing that resulted in them and their lives being cut tragically short. So Cameron Minchell's mum is one of those. Cameron suffered serious head injuries in January of this year when he was dragged into an industrial metal lathe and died later in hospital. He was only weeks into an apprenticeship at Zafar Engineering UK in Greater Manchester. An incident which the HSE director whose file this came across said sounded like it was out of Victorian times. Now FACK, through Hilda, has been supporting Cameron's mum Joanne as she begins her search for answers as to how this could possibly have happened to her son. She says, "I took my son to his workplace every day because I believed he should be working, and I thought he was safe as it was a government-approved apprenticeship at an engineering company." Cameron's mum had no fear about sending him to work. Why would she? Why should she? But the reality for FACK families is very different because their husbands or partners have been killed. There are those who fear the time coming when it's time for their children to go into work. And they live with that fear as they live with their own pain, because as Helen Farr has said recently, when you're happily married, you never entertain the thought that one day your husband could be taken away from you. With me, there was no warning. Ken was a fit, healthy young man who left home one day and never came back. She's formed an increasingly active widowers group, helping fill the void left by her husband's death. She was a widower at the age of 37. Lindsay Farnley was a widower at the age of 25. Who, I hear you ask? Well, you'll know her better as Lindsay Herbertson, my fellow FACKer. Her husband Herbie was killed in 1998 at the age of 29. Lindsay has taken the no doubt painful but brave decision to revert to using her maiden name to aid with the process of going on, some 15 years on from Herbie's death. And so because of the impact it has, we can't understand why the public are all too often taken in by the government rhetoric on health and safety. Why they would be taken in by Cameron and his ilk, who talk of the health and safety monster. Yet who wrote a letter to Oil and Gas UK stating that over the last 25 years the North Sea has embraced continuous improvement in health and safety, an appropriate lasting memorial to those who suffered so terribly a quarter of a century ago. Yet the Health and Safety Executive are to scrap their dedicated offshore division, formed in the wake of the disaster in order to meet his budget cuts. And so FACK has been seeking to challenge Cameron and his pronouncements whenever we can. He spoke at an enterprise hub at the University of Central Lancashire and cited health and safety regulations as one of the reasons behind a lower number of companies offering work experience placements. He told the audience this was very, very bad news. He said, "We need to encourage businesses to offer that work experience. We need to simplify health and safety rules. We need to say to schools, every school should have a plan for how they're going to teach children about enterprise and business." Well, yeah, we agree, they should have a plan, but we suggest that the government and the Prime Minister stops mistakenly labelling health and safety rules as too burdensome. We suggest he looks at the facts. Because over the last decade, at least 5 under-19s have been killed each year, and up to 5,000 have been seriously injured at work. That's not due to too much health and safety, but too little, and it's only going to get worse. Because compare and contrast a DWP press release from last month on work experience for school children with our own. The DWP said, the latest stage of the government's commitment to debunking health and safety myths and slashing burdensome rules has seen ministers today outline plans to make it as easy as possible for employers to take on work experience students. Ours said, we have no problem with laws making it easier to understand and keep children safe. But this DWP statement is an ideological, fact-free, business-friendly, inaccurate, misleading and dangerous statement from the government. It's inaccurate on the law on health and safety for children on work experience placements, and by encouraging employer complacency may further endanger children. It's absolutely shocking that it is uncritically, enthusiastically and also legally inaccurately supported by the HSE, supposedly the watchdog whose mission is the prevention of death, injury and ill health to those at work and those affected by work activities. So it appears we can't trust the government or the HSE with the job of keeping us safe, keeping our children safe. But we're making as much noise as we can to get the truth out there, and we'd ask for your assistance with that. Pick up our press releases and use them in union publications, and more widely to get the message out to the vast swathes of the general public who would still believe that a death at work is a tragic, unforeseeable accident. We know the reality is also different, and that's why at every turn we will challenge use of the word accident. An accident waiting to happen is no accident, and often even the word incident doesn't begin to cover it. I listened to an interview by Lord Cullen last week, who conducted the Piper Alpha inquiry. He referred to that as an accident and very quickly corrected himself to disaster. Any work-related death, whether causing an incident or due to illness, is a disaster for the family who's left behind. So we're having some difficulty getting the condemned government at Westminster to listen to us, but we're finding other ways of getting our message to the politicians and to employers. So for the second year running, FACK were involved in an exhibition at the Scottish Parliament alongside the Scottish Hazards Campaign in the lead up to Workers' Memorial Day. There was a debate in the Chamber about Workers' Memorial Day while we were there, and much of the information that we were giving out was used during that. Now, not that there are many of them in the first place, but there was no Tory or Lib Dem MSP in the Chamber during that debate. But there are others at Holyrood who do listen, who do get it, and who we will be pushing in the year ahead to take issues forward. And we've also been taking the FACK message direct to employers this past year. At the suggestion of Ian Tasker from the STUC, I was invited to Babcock International Group to speak specifically about what had happened to my brother. I've spoken a number of times at their Rosyth site where they're constructing the aircraft carrier, and this photo was taken on a visit to Appledore in North Devon. I share a special affinity with the man standing next to me. His brother-in-law was involved in an electrical incident, airlifted to hospital, and tragically did not survive. He's their health and safety manager down there. He's another man who gets it. And from what I've seen at Babcock, it's one of those fine examples of a workplace which is a union workplace, which is a safer workplace. I return again to Westminster because we are very far from giving up hope of convincing them down there of the need for stronger enforcement, proactive inspections and effective legislation. So Linda Whelan was invited to speak at the Save Our Safety lobby of Parliament. She appealed to unions and campaigners to stand together and fight to stop destruction of health and safety laws during a session in which Cameron's arrogant pledge to wage war against the excessive health and safety culture was repeatedly condemned. As press coverage of that event stated, lobbyists from the construction unions UCAT and Unite rose to their feet as she told them, shaking with emotion, "It is 11 years on Thursday since I buried my son. My biggest fear is that more and more people are going to be burying their loved ones as well." And that brings me back to my cradle to the grave theme, because as Linda said, new dates get put in your diaries. The date of the funeral, my brother's coincided with that of Robin Cook MP. The date of the incident, which for Dawn and Paul Adams was the date they went shopping with their 6-year-old son and returned home with one less child. The date you get the call to say you should get yourself to the hospital, which for Dorothy and Douglas meant a horrendous drive from Largs to Chester. The date of the death, which for Lindsay was the date she switched off her husband's life support machine. A date which is also her son's birthday. And Workers' Memorial Day. I'd wager money on the vast majority of FACKers not having had that date in their diaries before their loved ones were killed. It certainly wasn't in mine, but it's a firm fixture now for those of us who either speak at or attend events to remember our loved ones. And FACKers spoke the length and breadth of the country again this year. We reiterated that deaths caused by work are far more common than the HSE would have you believe. We urged people not to be duped into thinking that the HSE's figure of 148 workers was anything like the whole story. The Hazards campaign counts the real cost of work-related death, injury and illness. Around 1,400 killed from work-related incidents, not accidents, and up to 50,000 who die as a result of work-related illnesses. A total of 140 work-related deaths a day, 6 while we've sat here this hour. And so for me, it's why another new date has been stuck in the diary, the date I handed in my notes at work. Because as of September, I'll be a Scottish Hilda Palmer in training. That's for sure, but I'll be doing my damnedest to set up and gain long-term funding for a Scottish Hazard Centre. Why? Because of this young man. Seen here, he's setting out on a journey up Ben Lomond with his fiancée and their best friends. They were setting out in something which has been in short supply of late. In the pissing rain. But the fact is, his journey to a far too early grave is what motivates me. I make no apology for ending with the same message as I did last year. We FACKers are fighting for the right of others not to walk in our shoes, just as you are. So here's another year of countering the condemned attacks, making the general public wake up to the reality of health and safety, and making our workplaces safer. Thank you for all that you do, because we wish that individuals like you had been in the workplaces of our loved ones. Here's to a successful conference and a life-saving year ahead, in which we will stop them from killing us.